Ever wondered how a peaceful protest can turn into chaos within minutes? Let's take a step back to July 6, 2016. On this day, a routine traffic stop turned fatal. Philando Castile, a 37-year-old man, was tragically shot by an officer. Castile, known for his calm demeanor, gently informed the officer he had a firearm, intending to avoid any potential violent outcomes. Despite his non-threatening approach, he was fatally wounded. His final moments live-streamed on Facebook by his girlfriend. This needless loss of life sparked outrage across the United States. The video, raw and unfiltered, laid bare the harsh reality of police brutality, igniting a fire of protest that swept across the nation. People were moved, their hearts heavy with grief and anger, their voices rising in unison to demand justice for Philando Castile. Within a week of the incident, by July 14th, thousands had taken to the streets. Protests erupted in over 14 cities, one of which was Dallas. The magnitude of these protests was unprecedented, a testament to the collective frustration and desire for change. But with such large gatherings, the risk of disorder was always present. Looting, clashes with the police, and instances of lawlessness began to surface. Amidst the chaos, one man, a Texan native named Micah Xavier Johnson, saw an opportunity to execute a plan he had been harboring for years. Johnson, an Army veteran, had served in Afghanistan in 2013. However, his military career was marred by incidents of harassment and violence, leading to his disarmament by the Army. This did not deter him from his intentions. In fact, it only served to fuel his hatred and resentment towards law enforcement. As the protests continued, Johnson prepared himself for an attack that would shock the nation. Armed with a Kevlar vest, level 3 plates, an AK-74, and Glock 19, he positioned himself strategically, his sights set on the gathering officers. And so the stage was set for a day that would go down in history. Now, meet Micah Xavier Johnson, the man who would disrupt this peaceful protest in the most violent way possible. Micah Xavier Johnson hailed from Texas, a man whose life was far from ordinary, marked by several turns that led him down a dark path. He began his journey in a seemingly honorable way, joining the Army as a carpentry and masonry specialist. His dedication and commitment led him to be deployed on active duty to Afghanistan in 2013. However, his military career was not as clear-cut as it may seem. His troubles began to surface in 2014 when a female soldier accused him of harassment. She recounted an incident where Johnson, in a fit of anger over her leaving for college, shattered a car window with his bare fist, severely injuring himself in the process. He then forced her to take him to the hospital. His actions didn't go unnoticed by the Army, and due to this and other incidents, he was disarmed. But his story doesn't end there. Behind the scenes, Johnson was nursing a deep-seated anger, a resentment that was slowly turning into an obsession. He began plotting an attack on law enforcement, a plan he had been nurturing for years. His military background gave him the tactical knowledge, while his rage provided the fuel for his actions. This was no random act of violence. Johnson's intentions were clear. He wanted to make a statement, to lash out at a system he believed had failed him and many others. His anger was not just personal, but also a reflection of the wider societal issues that were at play during this time. His life was a series of unfortunate events, a spiral of negativity that seemed to pull him further and further into the abyss. He took his personal frustrations and projected them onto the world, leading to a tragic and violent outcome. Johnson, filled with rage and a twisted sense of justice, was about to bring terror to the streets of Dallas. The time was 8:55 p.m. and the peaceful protest was about to take a deadly turn. The sun had set on what had been a day of peaceful demonstration when Micah Xavier Johnson arrived on the corner of Velma Lamar Street. A former Army veteran, Johnson had been planning his attack on law enforcement for years, and tonight he was ready to put his plan into action. As the protesters marched, Johnson separated himself from the crowd. He moved south, away from the throng of voices and placards, and took cover in a building that overlooked where the officers had gathered. Concealed in the shadows, he donned a Kevlar vest and level 3 plates, preparing himself for the violence he was about to unleash. There was an eerie quiet before the storm. Then, without warning, the first shot rang out. Johnson, armed with his AK-74 and Glock 19, had begun his assault. The peaceful protest was instantly transformed into a scene of chaos and fear. People ran for their lives, scattering in all directions as the sound of gunfire echoed through the night. The officers, taken by surprise, were the primary targets of Johnson's attack. One by one, they fell. 5 officers lost their lives that night, their duty to serve and protect ending in a hail of bullets. Their comrades took cover, radioing desperately for help as the relentless gunfire continued. But the officers weren't the only ones caught in the crossfire. Johnson's rampage also left several people injured, 2 of whom were civilians. The streets, which had earlier been filled with the voices of peaceful protesters, were now filled with the cries of the wounded and the terrified. As the city descended into panic, the police were left scrambling for a response. The peaceful protest had turned into a nightmare, a deadly shootout that would leave a lasting scar on the city. Yet, even in the midst of the chaos, the brave men and women of law enforcement were determined to bring an end to Johnson's deadly rampage. The fight was far from over, and the night was still young. With the city under siege, it was time for the police to fight back. The officers, cornered and under fire, had to think fast. They needed a solution that wouldn't put any more lives in danger. And that's when they turned to an unlikely ally, the Andrus Mark V, a robot typically used for bomb disposal. Now this was no ordinary robot. The Andrus Mark V was designed to handle highly dangerous situations, diffusing explosives without risking human life. But on that fateful night, its mission was different. It wasn't there to defuse a bomb, it was there to carry one. The officers had decided to equip it with C4 explosives, turning the robot into a mobile bomb. This was a drastic decision born out of a desperate situation. But it was a decision that had to be made. The officers knew that they couldn't risk more lives in an attempt to stop Johnson, so they banked on the robot, hoping that it could end the rampage without further bloodshed. The Andrus Mark V was then sent on its crucial mission. It silently navigated the streets, its every move controlled by the officers from a safe distance. Johnson, holed up in a building, was oblivious to the approaching danger. The robot finally reached its destination. It moved closer to Johnson, unbeknownst to him the deadly payload it was carrying. And then, in a flash of light and a cloud of smoke, the C4 detonated. The explosion rocked the building, mortally wounding Johnson and effectively ending his reign of terror. The decision to use the Andrus Mark V in this way was unprecedented. It was a stark reminder of the desperate measures that had to be taken that night. But in the end, it was a decision that saved lives. The robot, designed to defuse bombs, had become a weapon of last resort. And it had done its job. In the chaos of that night, a bomb disposal robot became an unlikely hero. The dust had settled, but the echoes of that night would reverberate for years to come. The incident had an indelible influence on the nation, leaving a lasting imprint on our collective conscience. The public reaction was a mix of shock, grief, and anger. People questioned the security measures in place, and the very essence of peaceful protesting was put under scrutiny. The law enforcement community was shaken to its core. The incident led to introspection, with an increased focus on training and the mental health of officers. It became a catalyst for change, leading to a re-evaluation of crisis response protocols and a push for more transparency and accountability. The public opinion was polarized. For some, it highlighted the urgent need for comprehensive gun control, while others saw it as a glaring example of the dangers faced by law enforcement every day. A peaceful protest had turned into a tragic incident, reminding us all of the thin line between peace and chaos.